Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and today I'll be talking about the American Revolution. And what I'm going to be doing as usual, just major battles like I did in my last video of the French and Indian War. And then at the end of the video I'll just show you what I've been working on and where I've been and why I haven't been uploading really. Okay, so the American Revolution started over a couple of things. One thing is that after the French and Indian War, King George set up a boundary line where Americans could not settle across the Appalachian Mountains. And the Americans did not like this because they had fought with him and they thought that they should be fairly rewarded with westward expansion. And along with the other things like taxes, they didn't like the taxes, the Boston Tea Party and all that. And then came the Boston Massacre in 1770, and that basically set off kind of hatred towards the British. And in April 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord happened. And with Lexington and Concord, the British were ordered to go storm a weapon stash or an armory in the town of Lexington. And when the British got there, the militia were already waiting for them. Basically, they had a big battle there, and the militia had to fall back. And they fell back to Concord, but when the British got in the town and got to the armory, all the ammunition and guns were gone because they had hidden them and taken them with them. And after that, the British advanced to Concord, where they were repelled by the militia. And then they had to go on a 20-mile march back to Boston. And during that march, militia were firing on them all the way there. And yeah, that's basically the first major battle where it started. I wouldn't say it's major, but it's where it started. Okay, Bunker Hill, 17th of June, 1775. At the commencement of open warfare, 20,000 New England militia mustered under General Armistice Ward and surrounded Boston. The Americans learned through spies that British Governor and General Thomas Gage intended to occupy the Charlestown Peninsula and strategic heights overlooking Boston. 2 days before Gage's move, on the advice of General Israel Putnam, 1,000 colonials under William Prescott and Richard Ridley, with 2 small cannon constructed at night a redoubt on Breed's Hill. The position north of Boston lay in the line of planned British advance and directly under British observation. The covert and necessarily hasty establishment of the position, limiting the amount of food and ammunition the Americans had on hand. British ships commenced an ineffective bombardment at daylight, Gage and his generals deciding upon an immediate attack before the Americans could link the new fortification with their others. Tides, winds, and shallows and the high elevation hampered the British Royal Navy's efforts to assist the Army's attack. The first British difficulty in launching an infantry assault upon the position was in securing enough water transport to land. Gage's allotted force of 26,000 men, and the first British wave of 1,000 troops digging in and prompting Ward to reinforce the American position of 1,400 men, while Prescott frantically tried to firm up the resolution of his green troops and anchor his line on the Mystic River. The British failed to scout the line of their planned attack, which was crossed with stony ridges, long grass, and fences. General Putnam did his best to solidify the American defenders, who wavered in some cases between fleeing before the attack or attacking outside the defenses. Additional British forces landing in Charlestown came under American fire and retaliated by burning the town. The British plan, followed repeatedly in the course of ensuring war, was to flank the Americans out of their position. In this case, the British right found fences and a well-designed American position, pouring an effective fire into their advance despite the British artillery bombardment. With the flanking movement failing, Charlestown in conflagration and evening approaching, Gage ordered his entire force into a headlong attack uphill. The celebrated American order was don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, and with breastworks, walls, and fences to steady them, the Americans obeyed it, maximizing supplies as the British force drew back with casualties. General Henry Clinton moved through burning Charlestown and launched another attack upon the American left, victorious so far, but now searching the fallen for ammunition. British artillery finally cleared the American defenders, and the British finally rolled up the American flank. Both sides restored to the bayonet as the Americans slowly withdrew, suffering 310 casualties and 30 prisoners, having inflicted 1,053 British casualties despite the efforts of the British light infantry to exploit the Americans' withdrawal. Sufficient resistance and reinforcements remained to halt further advance, leading to stalemate on the peninsula upon which the battle had been fought. Both sides... Okay, that's basically the end right there. So, kind of a lot there. I'll just kind of sum it down for you. The Americans had built defenses up on Breed's Hill, and the British had launched an artillery bombardment with the Navy early in the morning. And the British just tried to charge up that hill all day and basically failed until the very last time, which the Americans were running out of ammunition anyways, which, honestly, the British took the ground, but the Americans had inflicted more casualties. So it's basically an American victory. Or, kind of. Casualty-wise, it was. Alright. Let me try to find another big battle, because I'm only doing major battles. If you want me to do, like, smaller battles, I'll make a separate video for that if you want me to do that. And I'll talk about what my next video is going to be. Okay. Here's a nice one. Trenton, the 26th of December, 1776. A characteristic... Okay, I know a lot about Trenton, so I'm not going to read the book on this one. So basically, Washington was camped across the river from the town of Trenton, which the Hessians hired troops. The Hessians were hired troops by the British to fight in the Revolution. So Washington was camped across the river, and nobody was expecting an attack during the winter. So, you know what George did. Cross the river to plan an attack in the winter. So it was Christmas night, crossed the Delaware, caught the Hessians by surprise, and basically, after a pretty short battle, basically all the Hessians surrendered. There were more surrendered Hessians than killed. Okay. So I didn't even have to read that one, just a quick little one right there. Alright. Okay, Fort Ticonderoga, I like this one. The British counterattack out of Canada took the form of an invasion southwards along Lake Champlain with 8,500 men under General John Burgoyne, planning to link with the force under General Charles Cornwallis. You'll hear about him later. Moving up out of New York City and splitting New England from the rest of the colonies, the naval battle of Valcour Island delayed, but did not stop the movement southward. General Arthur St. Clair and 3,100 men garrisoned at the stone fort, blocking Burgoyne's route into New England. Ticonderoga had changed sides several times over its existence. In previous sieges, attackers had mounted siege cannon on Mount Defiance, a neighboring height which St. Clair had neglected to defend. Burgoyne having followed that precedent, St. Clair and his men abandoned the fort by night, following another precedent of the fort's past defenders. St. Clair faced and survived a court-martial. Alright. So basically, the Americans had taken Ticonderoga like very early into the war and captured all the cannons at the fort, and they still held it. And what happened there, the American General Arthur St. Clair, he had not wanted to defend a height which was overlooking the fort, which would have been a key point of British artillery, which the British exploited, had their artillery up there and bombarded the fort, and or were gonna bombard the fort, but once Arthur saw the cannons, he basically just abandoned the fort, and they tried to court-martial him, but he he didn't get court-martialed. Here's a better view of the siege. It's got a picture of it right there, if you can see it. So there's the height right there, and then that's Ticonderoga. Okay. Okay. Brandywine Creek, the 11th of September, 1777. Ooh, this is a long one. I may not do this one. No, it's fine. I can do it. With the help of the newly arrived Marquis de Lafayette, Washington and the Continental Army ventured upon battle to prevent General William Howe's thrust up from the Chesapeake to seize the American capital of Philadelphia. British forces numbered 13,000 men against Washington's 15,000, making this action the largest battle on the North American continent before the Civil War. American light infantry shadowed the British Army's approach to Washington's line across Chadds Ford through the namesake creek. Finding the Americans prepared to receive him, Howe had dispatched light units and received intelligence from the local loyalists about American positions. Howe decided upon a holding attack with 5,000 men under General Wilhelm von Knyphausen, attacking at Chadds Ford, while General Charles Cornwallis took 8,000 troops around Washington's right flank. The British forced the crossing, while Washington received a growing trickle of reports about a second British force to the north. Washington sent his troops to reinforce his right and ordered a defensive line prepared on Birmingham Meeting House, a half-mile to his rear. With both American flanks slowly yielding to his attacks, Howe launched a bayonet charge into the American center that collapsed Washington's line. As other British units attacked frontally, isolated American units slowed the British as the day drew on, while General Nathanael Greene commands determined resistance retreating from Birmingham Meeting House to Battle Hill. Frustrated British attempts to turn the defeat into a rout, Howe had cleared the way to Philadelphia, but his primary objective of Washington's army survived, with 300 killed, 600 wounded, and 400 captured, against the British losses of 100 dead and some 400 wounded. The grimness of American resistance signaled a fundamental shift in the war. Alright, so that was a pretty short one. That was basically the Americans tried to defend Philadelphia, or the route to Philadelphia, and they failed, so they had to fall back. And then we're about to have another battle in the Philadelphia campaign. There's two ones that I like. It's Brandywine and Germantown. Okay, Germantown, 4th of October, 1777. With the British now occupying Philadelphia, Washington, with 11,000 men, launched a four-part attack from the north of the city. Confusion, the British... Oh, okay, hold on. Confusion. The British complexity and unexpectedly stiff British resistance eventually frustrated the assault. So Washington at Germantown tried to take back Philadelphia, but he failed. Alright. Okay, the winter at Valley Forge. I don't need to say much about that. Valley Forge was, they basically camped in a valley near Philadelphia to wait out the winter and attack during the summer. And basically, that was not a good winter. Everybody was starving, everybody didn't have enough to eat, and it was just a bad time for them. Alright. Okay. I'm trying to find another one here. Alright. You know, let me go back to... It's just a short one. I could probably read it. Okay, Monmouth, 28th of June, 1778. General Henry Clinton, receiving William Howe as the ground commander in the colonies, had to evacuate Philadelphia after France's open entry into the war on behalf of the Patriots, moving his wounded and endangered loyalists by sea and his army by land. Clinton and the rest of the army moved out of Philadelphia. Washington chose to shadow the British march and wait for a favorable opportunity to bring them into battle. With the British tired from the march to Monmouth Courthouse, Washington engaged, ordering General Charles Lee to attack the British rear. While the bulk of the Continental Army blocked the British advance, Lee's wavering delayed his attack, allowing the British to concentrate on the forces ahead. Washington and more decisive generals firmed up on the Continental line, Clinton deciding to break off the engagement and complete his march towards New York. Okay. Not one of the longest ones. Alright. Once again, if you want me to do minor battles, I will do a video on that. I may have to make a part 2 and a part 1 and a part 2 if I do that, because there's a lot of them. So yeah. Alright, Charlestown. Ooh, wait. Wrong one. Sorry. Okay. Camden. Alright, here's a good one. The 16th of August, 1780, the Battle of Camden. Taking command in the south after Charleston, General Horatio Gates led 3,000 Continentals against what Thomas Sumter had told him were 700 British. Lincoln's hasty march starved and weakened his army, while British General Charles Cornwallis reinforced Camden with 2,400 men. Learning too late of Cornwallis's arrival, Gates' army fought desperately, but eventually disintegrated, with Gates and the survivors hounded by Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton's Loyalist cavalry. Alright. Kings Mountain, the 7th of October, 1780. British Major Patrick Ferguson, I cannot speak today, led 1,000 picked loyalists into the North Carolina mountain country in an effort to force the locals to cease rebellion. When Ferguson threatened reprisals against intransigents, Isaac Shelby and John Sevier rallied angry Highlanders, their ranks soon joined by militia from other states as they prepared to engage Ferguson and his force. Possessed of superb Pennsylvania rifles, many of the Highlanders were superlative shots. Ferguson moved south, seeking to overtake a retreating Georgia Patriot band. Ferguson occupied the ridge of Kings Mountain upon learning that Patriot bands were converging on him from all directions. Rifle fire from surrounding trees cut down Ferguson and any British officer trying to lead a charge. Loyalists numbering 400 fell before the Patriots accepted the surrender of the surviving 600. Some of those later executed after this blow to British prestige. Alright, so basically what happened, they had some North Carolina Highlanders against British Loyalist Patriots, and basically the Patriots just surrounded Kings Mountain and then hit them from all sides. And then they all surrendered. Alrighty. Okay. Cowpens, the 17th of January, 1781. We're getting towards the end of the war now. General Nathaniel Greene moved the Continental Army back into South Carolina, dispatching General Daniel Morgan to rally militia and threaten British outposts. Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, with 1,250 British regulars and loyalists, moved in pursuit, while Morgan gathered forage and militia forces around his Continentals. Upon hearing of Tarleton's pursuit, Morgan consolidated his forces at this battlefield, which offered opportunities for both forage and retreat. Tarleton exhausted his own men in a rapid approach that failed to catch Morgan off guard. As more militia arrived, Morgan made the decision to engage the dreaded commander. Morgan had about 2,000 men to face Tarleton's picked body. Placing riflemen in the trees on his flanks, Morgan put his militia in the crescent front line facing Tarleton's advance, with his Continentals behind them, exacting from the former a promise to keep 3 volleys before they ran, with the Continentals ready to enforce that guarantee. Too worn out for elaborate flanking maneuvers, Tarleton's men marched forward as Continental riflemen picked off their officers. British efforts to flank or reform collapsed under attack by Colonel William Washington's more numerous cavalry. The British line narrowed under pressure while the Americans retreated before it, firing volleys as they fell back and reformed. British artillery supported the advance, fell to a swift American rush. Washington's cavalry charged again as the British line collapsed, capturing guns, wagons, and supplies. Tarleton suffered 800 casualties to 25 Americans killed and 125 wounded. So a big victory for the Americans there. All right, Guilford Courthouse, the 15th of March, 1781. The defeats at Kings Mountain and Cowpens galvanized British General Charles Cornwallis into launching a full-strength effort with 1,900 troops against the resurgent Patriot cause in the Carolinas. General Nathanael Greene's brilliant strategy of allowing the British to chase the Continentals and alienate populations throughout the South had left Cornwallis with only brute force as a means to reassert British sovereignty. With his own forces elevated in numbers and morale, Greene carefully selected this battlefield and made ready for Cornwallis's assault, setting up his 4,440 Continentals and militia and 3 independent lines in face of the British advance. Fighting began with an inconclusive cavalry skirmish between Colonel Henry Lee's Legion and British Lieutenant Colonels Banastre Tarleton's British Legion. The British line fanned out from the road, while light artillery supported their advance. From the center, and heavier guns replied from the American third line. Cornwallis's line moved from the American third line. I just read the exact same thing over and over again, my bad. Cornwallis's line moved straight ahead, shifting sideways as the terrain necessitated and crumpled the North Carolina militia. In Greene's first line, Patriots retreating back to the flanks of their second line. The Virginia militia there held out longer, the British taking a steady amount of casualties as they advanced, their own artillery blasting both sides in the middle. Despite the collapse of the Third Line's Marylanders soon afterwards, Greene's forces withdrew 16 kilometers in good order, and largely reformed. American casualties were 79 killed, 260 wounded, and British 93 killed, 213 wounded, which was basically an American victory for casualties at least. Okay, and here's if it's getting a little bit too confusing to you, I'll show you the maps. Here's a map of the Guilford Courthouse. Alright. Okay, I think I can close it right now and talk about the Battle of Yorktown before I can show you what I've been working on. Alright, so the Battle of Yorktown, what happened after the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, General Cornwallis, he went to Wilmington, North Carolina, and basically got more men, resupplied, and then he went up to Yorktown, because that's where he thought he could hold out and like win this for the British. I don't know what he was thinking. But when he was at Yorktown, George Washington was up in New York. So what he did, he made it look like he was going to attack New York City, but then he didn't attack. He just took his whole entire army down to Yorktown and surrounded the city with French and American Continentals and all the militia combined. And there was British boats in the Chesapeake Bay, which Yorktown is set upon. And the French fleet basically got all the British ships out of the Chesapeake, and they blocked the British off by land and water. And after a month, Cornwallis surrendered. And that was basically the end of the American Revolution, with the war technically ending in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, but basically all battles ceased in 1781. Alright, so that is it for this video, but I will show you where I've been and I'll show you what I'm working on. So I was planning to do after I finish my American War series, I was planning on doing some Napoleonic stuff, and yesterday I went to my first wargaming convention and I won a big Battle of Waterloo plastic figures, and I have to paint all these. And I got French, I got British, basically like a bunch of them. And then I got the bases. I got to put a whole house together. I got to paint them. It is going to be a lot. So if I'm not posting constantly, that is why. And yeah, but I'm still trying to set up a shop. I'm just trying to get enough product to where I can set up a shop and have stuff in stock. Okay, and I'll show you one other thing. I bought these little Civil War soldiers that I'm gonna paint. How exciting. And I'm also gonna paint some War of 1812 soldiers later today if I can. And then also, this is a nice one. Which one's this? This is a Confederate hospital brigade right here with horses and everything. And I'm very excited to paint all these. It's gonna be tons of fun. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video.